Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's session. I'm Sophie, Professional Development Manager at English Australia, and I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Helen Cook. Helen is the Associate Director, TOEFL Client Relations Australasia, and she's been working very hard behind the scenes to make sure that the TOEFL test is available around the world for people during the COVID-19 crisis. So thanks a lot for coming today, Helen, to present to us. The way that Helen's going to run the session is she's going to take us through some information, and then at the end, she'll address any specific questions you have. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat during the session, and then at the end, Helen will address them. All right, over to you now, Helen.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Thanks to everybody for joining this afternoon to learn about, yes, another English language test. But this one is for China only. And we're aware that as a sector, you're pretty overwhelmed by the number of English language tests on offer at the moment. And I'm sure the students are a bit confused as well. So we'll talk about all of those things. We do want you to know that we appreciate, the opportunity to talk to you and to give you a review of these tests, and we hope that you'll be able to find something useful for your own college. One thing we have clarified, we have been unable to offer the TOEFL online test in China. That is not our decision, although some students tend to feel we're neglecting them in China. Test centres, as our IELTS, are run by the National Education Examinations Authority, which is an arm of the Ministry for Education. And they are normally running all of our test centres. They choose the test centres. They are responsible for their operation. During this time, NEA is under a lot of pressure to get up other tests it's responsible for in China, like the Gaokao. So they are totally focused on that. Our latest advice about the opening of testing is likely to be even up as late as September for IELTS and TOEFL testing. So you will understand that given the circumstances, we have tried to provide a solution. We know it's not absolutely perfect, but we think it's a credible interim solution for both you and for the test takers. And we want to help Chinese students. We know how important Chinese students are. And we would hope that they will be interested in this as well. So far, so good with the students. Okay, so what we're going to do first is look at what the TOEFL ITP Plus for China is, a bit about how students get into the system, how the testing is scheduled, the scores, the security, and then a bit about resources. And this will include some information that you might want access to. So, in a brief summary, this is a secure English language test solution for China. It's a 4 skills product. It's available in many cities across China, and there is significant testing capacity. The partner we're using, ATA, is an existing ETS partner who has already done paper-based testing for other products. In this model, the student pays, organises everything, just sends the results. There's no requirement for you to buy packages or to manage codes and all this stuff. It's all a student choice. The scores will come electronically, and there will be a way to verify them as well. The speaking interview is a separate experience for the student, and we will be providing the file of that speaking interview and some rubrics. Okay, so looking at the ITP Plus test for China, it is a secure testing solution, and it covers 3 skills for the ITP part: listening comprehension, structure and written expression, and reading comprehension. The speaking part is an interview, one-on-one interview, about 12 or 13 minutes. It's being done by a company called Vericant. Vericant has been established in China about 10 years ago. All of the people who work in the interviews are native English speakers. And it started out as a company that largely dealt with American universities. There is a different approach to admission in many universities in the US. It's a kind of a more portfolio approach. And so not only do they provide English language scores, academic scores, but they provide other information which might help or persuade a university to accept them. And the Vericant interview is one of these tools that students can access. So in terms of the ITP part, it is a paper-based test. It's administered in test centres. The test centres use ETS mandated protocols and procedures, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. So it's a high stakes paper-based test. Again, with the interview from Vericant, it's conducted under secure conditions as well. Now, we know that China is a major market for many Australian colleges, English centres, pathway programs, and so forth. So we understand that everybody was a bit frustrated that they weren't able to use the products that might have been available in other countries. And we understand that. We also would hope that you haven't had to resort to unproven, non-secure or low quality home-based tests, because this is an academic test. Some of the other items that are available, they're very much general English. Some are very limited in the range of skills that they cover. So we hope that you will have a look at this and see that it is useful for your purposes. We not only are testing now, but if something happens again in China during the winter and there's a resurgence of the virus and there are some closures again, we can revert to this model. So the ITP test is all questions that were specifically designed for a test environment. They're backed by 50 years of research. They were formerly used in the TOEFL paper-based test, so they have a long history of being used for academic purposes. There's the only part that is not the same with the TOEFL IBT, for those of you who are familiar with it, is it doesn't have the test of written English. What has happened since we stopped using the TOEFL paper-based test globally is we have taken off the test of written English, and it has been sold as a business-to-business offering for institutions who want to have a test for their own progress and program exit needs. So it's often used, we sell thousands and thousands of them normally, and it's often used for universities where English is not the first language, and they have running English programs or want students to do courses in English language or whatever. So it has, it has been continued to be used, but this is not the institutional model. This is in a test center. This is with the security that is involved in ETS testing, because it's being treated as a high stakes test. So in terms of the various skills, obviously listening comprehension, ability to understand spoken English as it's used in colleges and universities. The structure and written English, it's about structure and grammar and so forth, and reading comprehension, obviously, ability to read and understand academic material. So the ITP these days for the institutional version has two levels, 1 and 2. We are only offering level 1 in this mode for the ITP Plus. So the test takes just under 2 hours, and it comes up with a score that's maybe like, say, 525 or 550 or something like that, obviously depending on the student's proficiency. So you get individual skill scores and you get a total score. So how do students do all of this? They first register for the TOEFL ITP test and select the dates and times. When the payment's completed, they receive an appointment confirmation straight away, and then they'll get an email from Vericant so that they can set up their speaking interview. Now, Vericant can be the interview can be taken before or after they do the TOEFL ITP, but both the results will be brought together before you receive them. So the Vericant interview will be provided as a video conferencing file, and you'll receive the full unedited video. For students who are paying for this, it's a bundled cost for one ITP test and the Vericant interview. When they have done that, if they want to, they can also enroll for a second ITP test and use the score again for a lesser fee. Registration is already opened and testing starts tomorrow. So what will happen, and it will depend on demand in each of the cities, but basically what will happen is testing will be available every Saturday. There will be in the busier centres, there will be morning and afternoon sessions. As you can see, there are lots of cities listed there, and more will be added. And ATA is an existing test organisation. They have a lot of capacity for paper-based testing. So we don't estimate that we will have a huge problem in terms of meeting the requirements of students who want to enrol. The video interview can be done almost any day of the week, and that will start shortly as well. The video, the interview doesn't actually have to be done online. It can be, there are Vericant centres in a couple of the major cities like, Beijing and Shanghai. But it's also possible for a student to do a video, an online, video conferencing anywhere in China. So they use Zoom technology, and when you get a copy of this presentation, I've also provided you with information about the actual video experience and the advice they give students in an attachment as well. And on that information sheet, there is also a link to a sample interview. No two interviews are the same. So there is one question that is always the same, although even then, the interviewers certainly try to sometimes phrase questions in a different way. They ask follow-up questions, and so it's a discussion, but it's a timed discussion. So the total thing won't take more than 13 minutes. So in terms of the scoring, the ITP there's been an extensive project by ETS to match the ITP to the CEFR. So this is done at both the whole score level and also the individual score level. And it goes from, I think, A2 to C1. And so if you refer to these websites, there's detailed descriptors for both the total performance, and also the individual skill scores. So, and there's more research that's available as well if you want to look on the website. So hopefully this will give you an idea of the actual performance of the student compared with the kinds of requirements that you might have. So in terms of an institution and a student receiving the scores come together. So the students have to complete both the ITP test and the Vericant interview, and there's no way they can do anything to either the scores or the interview. They can't edit the interview. They can choose which institutions to send their scores to. So one of the things that is a bit confusing is that the Vericant database often refers to schools when they actually mean universities, because it's very much in American parlance as though they're major customers. But that's actually colleges and universities that applies to. So the students send a single test and a single interview to an institution, and they can send it to as many universities as they like, but they can't do it. They can't send it over and over again with different versions. Now, we'll talk a bit about the Vericant database, because I want to say a few things about that. Vericant runs a school portal, and you can just go online and register. I think it's important to kind of think through this. I think it depends on how your admissions processes work. If you're in an institution which does its own admission, then you should register yourself. And if you're in an institution where all of the applications go to the International Admissions Office and then they come to you, then that's probably the organisation that needs to have the registration to receive the scores. I will be providing you with more information about that as well when you get a copy of the presentation. For those of you who are Slate database users, you will get them directly. But I know there are some institutions, but not too many in Australia, that use Slate. So this is just more about verifying on the database. Please wait till you receive further advice from us, and we hope to make the process a little clearer. So you will get both scores. You'll get the TOEFL ITP Plus score, and you will get the Vericant score. Now, these are not verifiable in the online score verification system that admissions officers have for other TOEFL scores, because this is just available in China. However, our China office will do verifications for you if you feel that you want that done. And the ID requirements and so forth, which we'll talk about, there's a consistent approach. So you'll be able to identify who those test takers are. So the results will be coming to you directly, electronically. The students won't be sending the results to you. They just choose the institutions. Okay, let's talk a little bit about security. So these will be tested under ETS mandated security and procedures with trained proctors. And there are stringent ID requirements. We all know the challenges that some organisations face in China. Only the Chinese, the national ID card that is issued for citizens, that is the only acceptable form of ID. If a student is in that country but they're not Chinese, they must use their passport. And as with other TOEFL test centres, there is a scanner in the test centre. So when the student produces the national ID, it's read by a scanner that connects to the national database so that the administrator can see whether it is the same person in the database as on the card. The student also provides a photo which is put onto their admission ticket, and that then is matched when they arrive. Is it the same person who was on the admission photo as the person with the card, as the person in the database? We also do a range of other things. I'm not sure if you're aware, but before you go into any ETS test environment, you are electronically wanded, so it's like going through an airport. And we also use detectors for unauthorised items. And this is all about stopping people bringing, firstly, obviously there's impersonation, but also either bringing in listening devices, second phones, those kinds of things. So this is just a quick pic of some of the facilities in the ATA environment in different offices. And there are some very specific requirements during this time because of health and safety reasons. One of the things that all test takers need to do is to provide a QR health code to show that they are healthy. Also, test centres can take their temperature, and if a test centre is taking the temperature, it takes the temperature of everybody, not just people who they think might be sick. They don't discriminate. Students can wear face masks all the time, except obviously when they're registering, they want to see who the person is. And when they're doing the Vericant interview, obviously they can't have their face mask on then either. So Vericant also has its own verification processes, which I won't go through the details, but it's the same process to make sure we've got the same person. And so we're looking at key ID information on not just the photo, but other ID information that's carried through so that we end up with the two results being exactly the same person. If they're doing the interview at home, they have to be alone in the room. And the Vericant system has thousands of questions in. And so the interviewers use different ones. No two interviews are alike, and there are follow-up questions. So it's with the exception of one question, which they will have some idea of what the question could be. It's very hard to plan for an interview. There is one common question that relates to their study plans. And of course, as you can appreciate, students will try to plan for that question. But the interviewer might ask them other things related to their study that they haven't planned for. So I will give you the advice, the tips that they provide to students and the instructions and a sample interview. Okay, so we're talking about unique identifiers and ensuring that they're the same person essentially there. In terms of resources, for students, there are a range of resources, mostly in Mandarin, of course. The TOEFL.cn website, you can certainly look at it, just press the translate button to get it into English. I did notice that Vericant's name comes up as a slightly different version than what we call it, but it's the same organisation. The China office of ETS, because TOEFL is so big in China, they have very active social media sites on Weibo and WeChat, and so Facebook, no, they don't have Facebook, I think, but they have, various other tools as well. So there's quite a lot of information, and we'll also provide this information to Austrade in China as well. And they in the past have been very helpful in letting students know relevant information, because TOEFL promotes Australia as a destination, as one of its key destinations, in fact, for TOEFL test takers. In terms of materials for students, there's lots of free practice materials. There are sample questions. There's an official guide and all of that kind of stuff. So, you know, students will know how they can prepare for the test. And obviously, we would prefer that they did. In terms of other information, there's the TOEFL ITP Plus website, which has information for you. There's a LinkedIn site. That's the Vericant registration site, and you can look at the Vericant website, or you can email me. So there are handbooks. There's plenty of information to help you to understand more about the kinds of skills and expectations that the test is looking at. And if you can't find it, you can always refer to me. Interestingly, because, as I said, TOEFL is a very, very well-known brand in China, the official launch has attracted huge media attention, and especially on social media. So we are pleased that students are interested in taking this option. And so overall, it's been a very positive and supportive response. One of the things we are going to do to help students is to also have a database, a list on the TOEFL website in China of the institutions who are accepting the TOEFL ITP Plus. It is a bit confusing for students who want to make an application and are taking the test to be able to understand which organisations they're going to be able to send their application to. So we're attempting to provide that information to test takers. And so we'll be hoping that you will register on the Vericant website and become part of that online list as well. So I've come to the end of the presentation now. I'm happy to take questions if there are any. Sophie, I'll just hand over to you so that you can let me know if there is anything that you want me to follow up.
Okay, sure. So somebody's asked, if a student can be at home to be interviewed, how can you make sure the student's alone?
Okay, I'm not sure if you're familiar with some of the tools that are used in this environment. We have this situation also in the TOEFL IBT home edition. And so if you're doing a Zoom interview, you will have the opportunity to show that the interviewer with your webcam, the environment that you're in, and in this case, it's primarily a conversation. So, you could be at home at your desk, you could be at your dining room table, you can be in a range of positions within your house or your environment. The important thing is to not have anybody walk in or start talking to you while you're doing the interview. And so the students are given some advice about what is possible and not possible and what they need to prepare. And there is a check done first, obviously. And the conversation is continuous, like they can't wander off and come, get some help and come back. It's a conversation.
Someone's also asked, should students go to a testing centre to register and to attend the test?
I don't think they need to go to the test centre to register, but they do need to go to attend the test. The test is a pen and paper test. So it is in a test centre in supervised mode. So they come, they have to go through all the registration process. They have to, prove their ID, go through the scanning and everything. So yes, it's all the normal protocols you would expect in a paper-based test. But I think they can register online.
Okay, someone's asking if there's practice tests available to let students familiarise themselves with the format of the test.
Yes, I think on slide 26, there's lots of free preparation. So there's sample questions, there's practice tests, and there's an official guide. So there's both an ebook and audio files, so that students can certainly do sample questions and see information about the test. We're certainly not trying to, we don't want to have students who don't know what to expect when they walk into the test. So there are definitely free test materials, and there's some information about that both on the TOEFL ITP Plus site for institutions and also the student sites, because there's a student site that in Mandarin that has a lot of this information. I mean, you can translate it to look at what's on the site on your own screen, but they are provided with all of that assistance.
Okay, thank you. So if there are any other questions, please type them in now. Helen, somebody has said, since this is paper-based, why don't you just offer the normal TOEFL test?
The TOEFL IBT is a computer-based test. We've been offering the TOEFL IBT as a computer-based test since 2005. And so in that particular environment, all of the testing for the TOEFL IBT has been run in computer-based test centres. Because, as I explained, the NEA won't allow us to do that, we have reverted to the TOEFL ITP solution. And that's what we were able to organise to have in this environment with ATA at this time. We agree it's may not be the perfect solution, but we believe it will give you, as English language experts, enough information about a test taker to identify whether they have the skills to enter your programs and at what level, because you will get scores that have been researched against the CEFR equivalences, and you'll also get access to be able to listen to the student and either use our rubrics for the assessment or use your own rubrics if you prefer.
Thanks, Helen. Another question, how many institutions currently accept this test in Australia and in other countries?
The webinar's only started yesterday for universities, and there is another one on Monday. So people are still getting the information. There are also global webinars, and there were webinars into the UK on Wednesday and one today. So this information is just rolling out now. There certainly are institutions who have already registered and new ones coming on to the Vericant database. I haven't looked at the list today, but I know the first Australian institution was Trinity College from the University of Melbourne. And I know there are some New Zealand universities that have already jumped straight in after yesterday's webinar. So it will take probably a little time. The largest number at the moment, when I last looked at the list, were American universities, but we actually think that the interest in studying in Australia will be much greater than studying in the US, given the current health and safety situation. And I'm told that in China, there is a very, putting our political sort of tit for tat news, there is a positive perception of Australia because we and New Zealand are seen as being so successful in the management of the virus.
Thanks, Helen. Somebody's asked if there's any research comparing TOEFL ITP scores to IELTS scores.
Not that I know of. The TOEFL ITP research has been against the CEFR. So, and as you know, that's not a simple, it's not a simple equivalence to compare those two. So I'm not aware of that research, if there is any. The research that is listed here, some of it has been done by ETS and some of it has been done by others, but it's essentially focused on the equivalence with the CEFR.
Okay, another question. Someone said, as you mentioned, this current situation in China is likely to continue until September. Will this test be discontinued after test centres reopen at greater capacity?
The answer to that is yes, absolutely. We would love our TOEFL IBT test centres to open. I guess the only opportunity that might occur to revert to this format would be if there was another shutdown, which obviously would affect our face-to-face TOEFL IBT test centres. I mean, as I explained, we don't have control, as does, and neither does IELTS, about the timing of the opening of the normal testing. And we will be awaiting advice from the National Education Examinations Authority. That is not the case for some other tests.
Thanks. Another question.
Mm-hmm.
How does the ITP score align with IBT score range?
Okay. As far as I'm aware, there is no direct research between the two, and there is a research reason for that. Researchers would not compare a test like the 3 skills IBT, they would be very reluctant to do something against a different type of 4 skills test. That is why they tend to move towards the CFR rather than the looking at another test. Doing research across 2 tests is, I don't want to go into a long lecture on this, but it's actually really complicated and very different, because when you get the modes, the score scales, the ranges, everything is different. It is very challenging to actually produce that work. And when we did the TOEFL IBT IELTS academic comparisons, that was real test scores that people had done both tests, the same people had done both tests. And that was an enormous project, and it was a very, very time-consuming project to persuade students to part with their scores and to validate them and so forth. So this research is not easy to do, which is why you don't see very much of it, because researchers are conflicted about the whole process. It's nothing to do with, you know, test rivalries or anything like that. It's to do with the research underpinnings of this kind of comparison, which is why they go to something like the CFR, which is a framework.
Okay. Another question. This seems to be a listening, reading and speaking test. Was the possibility of collecting or assessing a writing sample considered?
I think because they decided to use the ITP, that they haven't included that option. And so there is a test of written expression, but it's not an extended writing piece, which the old TOEFL test of written English was. And this test is marked fairly quickly, so the students get their scores fairly quickly, and you know, obviously the Vericant scores are done quickly as well. The Vericant interviews are done quickly as well. So there are, you know, swings and roundabouts.
Okay, I think that's it for questions. We seem to have come to the end of the questions.
I think that was a very interesting collection of questions.
Okay.
And I appreciate people's, you know, thinking about this. We are trying to, you know, do the best we can in the circumstances, and I think students appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate these skills through this way. I mean, there is a lot of research available on the TOEFL ITP. So I hope to provide you a little bit more information along with the copy of the webinar. But yeah, if you've got other questions, of course, I will pursue them for you.
Okay, Helen, there are just a couple of others that have come through. So do you have time to answer 2 more questions?
Sure.
Yep, great. Somebody's asking about the scoring. Is it correct that it's marked by human raters?
The choices are multiple choice. So I would imagine, while it might be marked by human raters, there is a template.
Okay, so it's not automated marking?
Not as far as I'm aware, but people are choosing answers, like,
yeah,
you know, yeah.
So sure. And the next question, what score do you recommend for university entry?
Having been around for a long time, when I started in international education in the late 80s, the TOEFL paper-based score was the only score we had. And so those scores are embedded in my mind. And the score that was commonly used was a score of 575, and there is a cutoff, a 573 cutoff in the score scale. For more demanding tests, so say MBAs and things like that, it was like 600. So if you were looking at, an EAP program, however, you would look, depending on the length of and complexity of your course, it may be, 530, 550, something like that. And that's, of course, a 3 skills score. And then you also got access, you're listening to the person speaking, you can make an assessment of their communication skills in that environment as well. So you get that additional information.
All right, Helen, thank you so much. That was really informative, and you went into a lot of detail answering some of those questions, and we really appreciate it. We also appreciate the opportunity you've given our members to have this up-to-the-minute information about testing in China, and for all of your engagement with the sector. Thanks again, Helen, and thank you to everyone for coming.
And thank you to you, Sophie. I think we appreciate the work that English Australia is doing at such a difficult time to try and support institutions and their partners.
Oh, thanks,
So
Helen.
good afternoon.
Yeah, okay. Have a great weekend, everyone. And as Helen mentioned, we'll be sending out a link to the recording slides and some more information on Monday as follow-up to this webinar. Okay.
Thanks, Sophie. Bye.
Thank you.